Believe it or not, it's been over 20 years since BMW bought Rover and introduced its vision of a modern day Mini, and dodgy version of the Italian job aside, it's been largely successful. So what better time to look back at the original BMW Mini? Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, redesigning an icon such as the Mini was going to be no small task, and this challenge fell to a chap called Frank Stevenson. Now, you might recognise his name from his work at McLaren. He designed things like the P1, then went on to Maserati and the MC12, and also ultimately designed the new Fiat 500. The Mini, well, you have to be a bit careful there because it's something of a precious jewel in British iconography. You have to design something that's modern and fresh and enticing for new customers, bringing the brand into the 21st century without offending everybody who loved the old car. It had to be recognisably Mini, of course. Well, Frank had a novel idea for this. The design of the original Mini basically didn't change from the 1960s onwards. So he took a blank sheet of paper, divided it up, and decided to design a brand new Mini for the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, before moving on to this car today. And I urge you to go and seek out these drawings because they're pretty incredible. And what this did was ensure that there was a clear lineage, a clear family resemblance throughout the decades until you eventually got to this car. Now, of course, this car features its own modern quirks. It's got lots of really interesting inspirations behind it. Things like the shape of the contoured bonnet was inspired by the shape of a pelvis. The mirrors are actually said to mimic the shape of a lady's breast. And that big chrome exhaust tip that's now part of Mini DNA was a total accident when designers were presenting to the members of the board and realised that the clay model didn't have an exhaust tip on it. So they cut a Coke can in half, folded it inside out and pushed it into the clay model. The design stuck. But it's proportionally Mini. Nice square glass house, short front overhangs, and of course those great big round characterful headlights. The design was ultimately a hit because Mini ended up selling double the number of these in Europe than what they initially projected. Of course, the interior has been modernised with glossy surfaces and additional chrome, but the biggest throwback to the original car in here has to be the central speedometer. Now, the reason it was placed there in the original Mini was because a pipe came through the back windscreen, through the dashboard and through where the grille would go to help rotate the bodywork in the factory to attach components underneath the car. The speedo was placed there to plug the hole. Obviously, with modern manufacturing, that wasn't the case with this car, but it does pay homage to the classic. Now, this R50 Mini isn't part of some prim and proper, highly polished heritage fleet that BMW owns. No, this is actually my BMW Mini. I bought it for about £800 and it was just there to be a spare car, really. I was waiting on another car to arrive. I needed a stopgap for a couple of months and this arrived. But that was 4 years ago and I've kept hold of it. And I'm going to tell you why. This very car is a Mini 1 and it was the most basic BMW Mini that you could get your hands on. They all came equipped with a 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated 1.6 litre engine, which, whilst is maybe a slightly bigger engine than you'd expect in a small car like this, especially by today's standards, it only produces about 89 brake horsepower, but a respectable 140 newton meters of torque. It's not fast by any stretch of the imagination. 0 to 62 takes nearly 11 seconds. So as you can imagine, this car wasn't there for performance. If you wanted your Mini to go a bit faster, you would have wanted a Cooper, faster still, a supercharged Cooper S, or faster again, a Cooper S with JCW pack. Now, those JCW pack cars were the responsibility of the same Cooper family who were involved with the classic Mini. Now, when engineers came to build this car, they got it right from the get-go. Because whilst it's a small car, they pushed the wheels right to the very extremes of the chassis to give this small car the biggest footprint possible. That's great for stability, and that's great for grip. Now, whilst this car's critics of the day bemoaned the general increase in size of the Mini, something it genuinely had to do to comply with regulations and crash safety, it's still a small car. It's, by today's standards, very small. It's 10 inches smaller than the current Mini hatchback. But this short wheelbase gives it a great level of agility, and team that with a fast steering rack, and it's actually great fun to drive, even in its most basic specification. Okay, it doesn't have the sportier suspension of the Cooper S, or certainly not the JCW cars, to keep body control in check. It sort of lists about like an old Spanish galleon. But there's plenty of grip, there's lots of reassurance, and it has this really nippy, nose-positive change of direction. And it is great fun. 5-speed manual transmission keeps you involved, some nice heavy pedals for precise inputs. And yeah, that's kind of why this car's stuck around in my garage, because whilst I don't really drive it very often, and it was only bought as a temporary car for not a lot of money, every time I drive it and go, maybe I should get rid of it, I'm not really using it, it's just enormous amounts of fun to drive on country roads like this. Getting a bit of a hustle on in this car is genuinely enjoyable and really quite involving. And it really is a testament to the guys who engineered the chassis of the car, because it's not the engine. The engine is plenty responsive and the power delivery and the torque is nice and linear. But it's the chassis that really makes this thing. It is hilarious fun. And part of me thinks it really shouldn't be, because, you know, it's an old car now, this very example, when the 5-speed gearbox is a bit buggy, but I love it. This high mileage Mini still puts a bigger smile on my face than a lot of modern hatchbacks. It's nice, simple, basic motoring, and the maintenance is quite easy too. I mean, this car's got clear of 130,000 miles on it. I've owned it for about 4 years, and the only thing I've had to do is put a new exhaust on it. Half of the reason it's loitered around in my garage for so long is because it hasn't really cost me anything. Clearly this Mini one with its 89 brake horsepower isn't particularly fast, but it's a surprising amount of fun, and isn't that how we describe a classic Mini in reality? Remind me what BMW got wrong with this car again?